Okay, I, Dr. Samreena Mansoor, welcome you all in this webinar, which is entitled Underpinning Principles of Disease Process Going Back to the Basics. On the behalf of Shifa College of Medicine, I'm working here as a professor of biochemistry, and we are conducting this webinar. And before we start our formal proceedings, I would like to request Professor Ijaz to please recite few verses of Holy Quran.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Inna aatayna kal kausar. Fasalli li rabbika wanhar. Inna shani'aka huwal abtar. Sadaqallahu al-azim.
Jazakallah.
Okay. Before we start the formal proceeding, I would like to explain the background of this webinar, how we have actually designed this and conceived the idea, and then we are trying to implement this series of webinars, hopefully. But this particular session, we are trying to emphasize the importance of the understanding of the disease process, and especially we are trying to highlight the need to improve the teaching and learning of basic sciences and clinical sciences, and trying to how we should integrate and how we are already integrated at our institution and at various other institutions nationally and internationally. We will, inshallah, hopefully there are two sessions, there are two halves of this webinar. In the first half, we will take the presentations from the speakers, and after the presentation, we will discuss the various burning issues with the panelists as well as with the speakers. You can ask, you can post your questions. And for the first presentation, I would like to request the guest speaker, Dr. Saira Saeed Mirza. She is Senior Postdoc Fellow at the Division of Neurology, Department of Medicine at University of Toronto. And Dr. Saira, if you can please start your presentation.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, 0%.
Thank you very much for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about the importance of basic and applied basic sciences in a clinical setting. I will give a broad overview. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in a nutshell, from mechanisms to diagnostics and to therapeutics, I think basic sciences form the backbone or the base of all medicine. When I say mechanisms, I'm referring mainly to physiology and biochemistry. When I talk about mechanisms going wrong, I'm referring to pathology mainly. With diagnostics, it's mostly biochemistry and now some new techniques as well. And with therapeutics, I'm referring to pharmacology and again, biochemistry, of course. So clinical sciences, or to be more accurate, the study and management of any disease is actually broaching all the basic sciences together. And to highlight and understand the importance of these basic sciences, we can take the example of the basic unit of life, which is the cell. In a living cell, in my opinion, from structure to function, everything is actually biochemistry. The honorable keynote speakers after my talk are actually the experts in the field, and they will give you more detail about this topic, but I'm simply going to give you an overview. So with the example of a cell, we can easily understand how important the basic sciences are, and in particularly here, I want to mention biochemistry. So taking examples, for instance, if we talk about the structure and composition of a cell, it is water, it's salts, which is the inorganic component. And then there's a carbohydrate, protein, nucleic acid, and lipid component, which is the organic component, biochemistry, for sure. Same principle can be applied to the entire human body and the composition of the human body. We all know that it's carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, and minerals. Then zooming in a little bit, the nature of cell membrane, which is a lipid bilayer. If we talk about the ion channels, which are proteins, and hormones, enzymes, genes, all the major chemical processes in the human body, for example, metabolism, all homeostasis, development of a cell, enzyme activity, hormone activity, membrane transport mechanisms, blood clotting mechanisms, the function of neurotransmitter, and the list goes on and on. And again, then there is more advanced fields like molecular genetics and genomics, which also involve the basic sciences, in particular biochemistry and physiology. Can we have the next slide, please? Yes, thank you. So now coming a bit towards my field, which is dementia. I'll take this as an example to explain or emphasize the importance of basic sciences in medicine. For those who are unfamiliar, dementia is a syndrome which is affecting memory, executive function, language, emotion, and social ability severely enough to interfere with one's daily life. Now we know that Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia. So here is the photograph of Auguste Ditter. This is the first diagnosed patient of Alzheimer's disease, and on the left you see Alois Alzheimer's, who diagnosed the disease, and it's named after him. If you look at this picture, just the patient, and you study the disease, the full syndrome of dementia boils down into two things or two abnormalities. One is the senile plaques, and the other is the neurofibrillary tangles. Again, biochemistry and histopathology, our basic sciences. What are senile plaques? Senile plaques are accumulation of abnormally folded protein amyloid beta in the brain. Amyloid beta, what is it? It's a short peptide, which is abnormal proteolytic byproduct of another protein, which is called the amyloid precursor protein. So pure biochemistry. Then what are neurofibrillary tangles? Neurofibrillary tangles are abnormal aggregation of the tau protein. Tau protein, again, is a microtubule-associated protein, which is expressed in the neurons, and it is functioning to stabilize microtubules inside the cytoskeleton of a cell. So conclusively, we can safely say that Alzheimer's disease is a proteopathy or a protein misfolding disorder. Again, you saw that such a complex disorder, Alzheimer's disease, boiled down into two basic abnormalities, which is the senile plaques and the neurofibrillary tangles, which is pure biochemistry and histopathology. And this principle will apply to almost every disorder that we know of, or that is under study, or that will be studied in future. And I cannot emphasize enough that clinicians and researchers who stand out or have stood out ever have a command on their basic sciences. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Saira, but we have no questions from the audience. Can you further explain how we can improve the medical curriculum, because how actually the teaching is taking place at your end in the University of Toronto? Any idea you want to share with the audience?
I think when we studied, the curriculum was not integrated as it is now. Here in these countries, now I see that there is also integrated curriculum being followed, so that if they are teaching one system, for instance, a cardiovascular disorder, they are studying all the basic sciences and the clinical sciences from the same system. So they would be studying anatomy, physiology, biochemistry of the cardiovascular system, and then the clinical sciences. I think this system is actually more effective because most importantly, it keeps the interest of the students, because I know if you are studying just the basic sciences and you cannot implement it, or you cannot imagine that how it's related to a disease, the students lose interest. And then in the fourth year and fifth year, when the diseases come, when we study clinical sciences, we have already forgotten the basic sciences. So I think an integrated system is really the way.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Saira. And I think we should move to the next speaker, Professor General Mohammad Aslam, and he is with us. He's the former founder, Vice Chancellor of Shifa tameer-e-millat University, and former Vice Chancellor of the University of Health Sciences and National University of Medical Sciences. And his topic is, he chosen the topic of cell membrane structure, function, and the disorders. He will try to relate the cell membrane, the importance of basic sciences with the clinical sciences. So please, sir, I will request you if you can start your presentation.
Thank you very much. Now, the assignment given to me is Introduction to the Cell Membrane, its structure and functions, and its relation with disorders. Now, this is also called as plasma membrane. It's a lipid bilayer, and it separates cells from its surroundings, and main function is to exhibit semi-permeability in its nature. And just to have a glance look, this is the structure of the lipid bilayer membrane. And then it has got various membrane proteins like integral proteins, peripheral proteins, and structural proteins. It has got lipids, phospholipids, cholesterol, glycolipids, and it has got membrane carbohydrates like glycocalyx. And then the functions, and then the functions of these substances. Phospholipids, they are responsible for cell fluidity, and cholesterols, they are responsible for structural integrity of the cell membrane, and integral proteins of the cell membrane. They help in transport molecules. They provide various receptors, and G proteins span the lipid bilayer. And peripheral proteins, they help in transportation. They are the receptor sites, and they are the sites for adhesions. And carbohydrates, they provide stability of the membrane and for help in cell recognition. Now, this is the role of the plasma membrane, which means the functions, that is a transporter, they act as enzyme transport, and then a signal transduction, cell surface receptors, and then the cell surface identity markers. They help in cell adhesions and attachment to the cytoskeleton. Now, then various substances, they cross the cell membrane by various mechanisms like passive transport and active transport. Passive transport is subdivided, as we all know, into simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion, and active transport is divided into two. Now, primary active transport and secondary active transport. Now, this secondary active transport is further subdivided into core transport system and the counter transport system. And this counter transport in old books or literature used to be called as exchange, cross exchange of substances. So these are the few examples of this passive and active transport in this slide. I'm omitting those in order to save time. And the functions of the cell membrane include protective functions, and then selective permeability, and they have got absorptive functions, and then they've got excretory functions and exchange of gases, that is oxygen and carbon dioxide, and then maintenance of the cell shape and size is also the functions. Now, there are certain genetic disorders which are related to cell membrane. Now, display in these disorders, the cell membrane, because of genetic mutation, plays an important role, like the diseases of achondroplasia and familial hypercholesterolemia, cystic fibrosis, and then there's the Wilson's disease and spherocytosis and metastasis of some of the tumor cells, and paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. So these are the few words, but as we will listen to the other speakers, then we make a story out of the underpinning principle of the disease process through the cell membrane. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is no question regarding the your topic in the chat box, but I would like to ask you regarding the previous questions which were posted by the audience during the registration process. And they, as you are expert Vice Chancellor, former Vice Chancellor, founder Vice Chancellor of Shifa, tameer-e-millat University of Health Sciences, keeping that in mind, someone is interested to ask you why we are still, as a clinician, we are lagging in management of hereditary disorders. Is there any specific reason, if we have already identified the mutations, why there is, even in Pakistan, we are far behind the other countries? What is the possible reason, and what should be the solution of this?
Yes.
The system of scientific research over here in our region and the management as well.
Right. In my humble opinion, the Department of Genetics has not been hybridized in our institutions, medical institutions. Because most of these disorders, they are genetic in origin, whether they are of the cell membrane or any of the organelle of the cell in any tissue or organ in the body. So, in fact, the Department of Clinical Genetics should be established in all the teaching hospitals and teaching institutions, and scientists and clinicians should work together there to know the backdrop or underpinning problems of the genetic disorders. Unless the geneticians, along with the clinicians, they don't hybridize together in a customized department, so this process of ignorance in such diseases will continue.
Okay, there is one more question. I think that is also appropriate to be answered from your side. That is there any relevance that the IT and modern teaching facilities now they are introduced in our teaching systems? So, is there any role they play in the teaching of medicine, core content of the medicine in they are really important, or the content-based specialist or the experts who know their content, they are more important, or IT is more important nowadays?
Both of them.
Both of them.
When we say integration, both of them. Without them, the modern science can't progress. Like, and the genetic diseases and the cancerous diseases, until unless we have got the registry, and that is done by the IT departments.
So,
Coding is done by the IT departments.
Can you enlighten anything which is done in you, because as a vice chancellor you remain in the National University of Medical Sciences, what have done in these big institutions, big names of these Pakistan?
Right. At least
we are standing right now.
That's right. And at least in UHS, there is a very good, strong department of genetics there in the university. And medical doctors, along with the scientists, they are working there, right? At least they are producing their MPhils and PhDs in genetics, but incidentally, many of the non-medical graduates, they come, but the medical graduates have also started coming in. And across the road of University of Health Sciences is CHEM, Center of Excellence for Molecular Biology. And there are many projects which are being collaborated, the Department of Genetics with Molecular Biology, and good PhDs are being produced with the conjoint efforts of the two.
And do you think they are actually materialized for the physicians? They are helping the physician to diagnose the disorders, or still we are lagging behind?
Not yet. That is lacking. That is why the scientists and physicians should join hands in the Department of Clinical Genetics to be established.
The question people repeatedly asking us as well, how we can bridge this gap between the non-medical, medical sciences, and how we can develop the interests, because the students are there in the medical school, they want to be clinicians, not the basic scientists or researchers. Why they should continue with the research? Or
well, in UK, there is an intercalated PhD programs. After second year, good students, good scoring students are given an opportunity to go for BSc, to do BS. And they are taken away from medical curriculum and go to the research laboratories of the hospital or of the institutes. They spend 1 year and they are offered scholarship. Those students who do good in BS studies, they are offered to join third year, like they've got 1 year delay, but they're given scholarship for PhD as well. They're offered to be scholarship. Some of them, they opt the scholarship for PhD, and they from BS, they do PhD, and they produce good. And then they're given an opportunity, if they want to go back to medicine, they can complete their MBBS. And those students who want to be doctors, so they rejoin the college at the expense of 1 year, and they have 1 or 2 or 3 publications. And then at the time of employment after MBBS, they are given preference to be appointed in the teaching institutions rather than in the peripheral hospitals.
So we can work on
that is one of the models to motivate and to get good scientists who have got some medical background as well.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Now we will move towards the Professor Ijaz Ahmed. Sir, please, if your topic of presentation is signal transduction in health and disease. So please enlighten us regarding your topic, and maybe the audience can post their questions.
Yes, okay, welcome.
Presentation next इधर से करके उसको देखना.
Yes. Yes, the topic is signal transduction and the related diseases. Next slide, please. Yes, next. Yes, this is my topic. Yes, please topic. This is my topic, signal transduction in health and disease. Really, today I'm very happy as a biochemistry student that throughout my teaching experience, the longest teaching experience, I came across many questions that where is your biochemistry and where is the medicine? So I was all the time working on it and relaxing my students and making, the palatable biochemistry for them on working on that to link it with the disease. So this is the right time today also. I'm happy to explain that the signal transduction in health and disease. So signal transduction, as Professor Asram recently has told, the transport across the cell membrane. So if this is also across the cell membrane. The signals are sent and they are implemented in the cell, and then the cell functioning that takes place. Here, the signals, we have to see what signals. Signals, that could be hormone, that could be toxin, that could be the chemicals. So they could be the neurotransmitters. So they are the signals. And they send their signals just, in between that comes at the membrane. There is a receptor, and then G protein, then enzyme adenyl cyclase, and then the cyclic AMP production, and then the protein kinase activity, and then further phosphorylation of the enzyme and their activity. This is how the cell functions. Now it can be well explained, this signal. Why that signal? Now, let's take a typical one example. If somebody is fasting and definitely his sugar level has decreased, and in response to decreased sugar level, glucagon secretes. And the glucagon is giving the signal. Glucagon is the legend. And this is combined with the receptor in the membrane. And there is a conformational changes in the membrane. And in this conformational change, in the next slide, please. The conformational change in the membrane, then it is attached with the inactive GDP protein, G protein, and then that activates. And this way, that is the GTP protein. The G protein is actually, what is it? It is known as G protein because it is linked with the GDP or GTP, and GDP is the guanosine diphosphate, and that's why it is named with the G protein. And the G proteins are three types. These are GS, GQ, and GI. Here, suppose the GS is attached with the receptor, and the glucagon gets attached with the receptor, and the conformational changes has taken place, and this way the G protein that gets attached with the GTP. Next slide, please. GTP, and these are the different types of the G protein. Next slide, please. This is actually the GTP-GDP cycle, but I'm giving you the practical example that in the body, how this signal transduction occurs in health, and I gave you the example of fasting and the sugar level decrease. Next slide, please. So in that, yes, this is actually, no, please, that's right. This is signal transduction. As I was telling you, that this gets attached with the receptor, G protein activated, and adenyl cyclase is activated, and then adenyl. Now, when the G protein works, then it again becomes inactive. This is the normal process, and then the cyclic AMP is produced, and the cyclic AMP will cause the phosphorylation of protein kinase A, and then protein kinase A will cause the phosphorylation of glycogen phosphorylase B, which is the glycogen breaking enzyme, and that changes to glycogen phosphorylase A, which is active glycogen breaking enzyme. So credit goes to glucagon, which was the signal that has been sent from the outside the membrane that please go there and break the glycogen so that the patient, the person should be given with the glucose because he is fasting. He has decreased his sugar level. How interesting it is that in the body the sugar level was decreased, but due to this process of signal transduction, when we are fasting, we being a Muslim, the glucose is produced in the body, and so that, the cell activity that goes on. So this is, and the importance of this signal transduction is that this is actually regulating the cellular functions, regulating the metabolisms, regulating the cell growth, regulating the cellular differentiation. So this is all now the survival of the body that needs this signal transduction. Now, everything which is going on in the body with the help of signal transduction, signals are sent and the things are implemented and we are, benefited. Now, at the same time, we suffer from certain diseases also with the problem with the signal transduction. And these diseases are, that could be with the toxins, and that could be with the problem with the receptor, problem with the G protein. So this is how in disease we go. The most important example I give over here, that the cholera vibrio toxin, which is a very common ailment or problem in our country. Here in disease, if you further slide, further, yes, further, please, yes, further, more, yes. Now, this is, I tell you the story that how cholera and where is biochemistry and where is this problem, and then if we understand the problem, we can very well treat it. So this at the membrane, mucosal cell membrane, there is a cholera vibrio toxin. From where it comes? It is fecal contamination of the water and the food, and the person who takes it, and this cholera vibrio toxin then gets it. This is having actually the 5B and 1A unit. And this cholera vibrio toxin at the membrane gets attached with the receptor, which is known as ganglioside 1, GM1. So when it gets attached with the GM1, A is detached, and this ADP ribosylation of the G protein takes place, and that ADP ribosylation, the special process in the cholera vibrio toxin, what is wrong in it? Wrong in it is that the GTP will not be inactivated. So this is locked up. Locked up means this G protein remains active. Normally G protein do the job and then it becomes inactive. Please note it. But when this cholera is, the G protein becomes active but it doesn't inactivate. So it keeps on producing adenyl cyclase and cyclic AMP, increased cyclic AMP. And if there is increased cyclic AMP, this will be increasing the phosphorylation of the protein. Which phosphorylation over here in the cholera? There is a CFTR protein, which is for the chloride channels. If it is phosphorylated, that becomes more active, and this brings more chloride towards this secretes more chloride, and hydrogen sodium exchanger also phosphorylated, and this where sodium is more put in outside, and this is how we are having more chloride and more sodium, more potassium bicarbonate outside the cell, and due to the process of osmosis, water will go along them, and this is known as osmotic diarrhea. So frequent bowel movement in the cholera reason is that this G protein has been locked up, because due to the GTP that is not hydrolyzed due to the ADP ribosylation. So you may have the question, when we treat, we give the ORS. So with giving the ORS, the cholera treatment, so in that also there is sodium and glucose, but in the facilitated diffusion of sodium and glucose, that is not inhibited by the cholera vibrio toxin. So in the same way, there are some other diseases also in signal transduction, like whooping cough. That is also this whooping cough toxin that creates and that inhibits the GI protein, and in that way adenyl cyclase remains active. So there are some other disorders with the process of signal transduction, like at the receptor level. And at the receptor level, if suppose LDL metabolism, low density lipoprotein metabolism, they need receptor at the membrane to regulate the cholesterol. But if receptor is muted, there is a mutation in the receptor, and the receptor is not available, one suffers from hypercholesterolemia type 2. This is hyperlipidemia. So this is so interesting that this process of signal transduction, understanding its normal process and its abnormal process, this is, I can very well say, this is very much linked with the clinical problems as we study in the biochemistry. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. There is one question which is already posted by the audience before this implementation of this webinar during the registration process. They were asking regarding the patients with the whooping cough. I think you have already answered that question. What is the role of GI is inhibited and how it leads to the increase in the cyclic AMP? Would you like to answer?
That's very interesting. If we understand that whole process, so we can easily get its answer. What is that? GI protein is inhibited by the toxin of whooping cough. That is inhibited. With the inhibition of GI, actually GI protein, that is regulating the calcium in the cell, right? Anyhow, here if the G protein is inhibited, So definitely the GS protein is active, and that is that goes on making more adenyl cyclase active, that is goes on more cyclic AMP. So this is the reason when the GI protein is inhibited, there is more cyclic AMP production, and if there is more cyclic AMP production, it is through different steps going towards the process of whooping cough.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, sir. And then we move on to the next, our speaker, the last speaker of this topic, Professor Dr. Mohammad Jadoon Khan. And I would like to introduce him. He's assistant professor at ComSet University, Islamabad. And his area of specialization includes the autophagy, lipid metabolism, cancer, iron homeostasis across membranes, stem cell and regeneration. And he's a very learned professor over in the Department of Biosciences at the ComSet, and with a lot of experience. And the topic he chosen for today's session is cellular iron homeostasis in health and disease. So please, Professor Jadoon, continue with your presentation. I think you have to unmute.
डॉक्टर जदून आपको अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा.
Okay, I think now you can. Okay. Please start from the first slide. If you can start from the.
Dr. Jadoon, you're not audible. There is something wrong with your audio.
Is it okay now?
Yes. Now.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Samrina, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. So I will talk very briefly because this topic is way too wide. So I have to talk very briefly just to keep the time. The cellular iron homeostasis in health and disease. So as Dr. Mahmood Aslam and Dr. Ijaz talked about the cell membrane and the cell signaling or cell signal transduction, the membrane is basically the organelle which separates the inside and outside of the cell. But that membrane is not like a neutral membrane. So the membrane is more charged toward the outside as compared to the inside. So there is more positive charge on the extracellular side and more negative charges on the intracellular or the cytosolic side. So if the ions move across the membrane through specialized channels, the positive ions, if they move into the cytosol, that leads to what we call the depolarization. And if the positive ions move outside of the cell, or the negative ions move into the cell, that leads to what we call the hyperpolarization. And in this way, the ions that make the membrane electrically and active organelle, and on the basis of that, we basically categorize the cells into two broad classes, what we call the excitable cells and the non-excitable cells. The excitable cells are like the neurons, like the glandular cells, and the non-excitable cells are those which are not much affected by this membrane potential. But still, they have the resting membrane potential, and this resting membrane potential is playing a role in many physiological processes. So to briefly talk about the major ions which are present within the cell are the sodium ions, the potassium ions, the calcium ions, the protons, which are all of these the cations, and the major anions or the negatively charged moieties are the chlorides, the phosphates, and the bicarbonates. And a balance of these two actually maintains an action potential or a resting membrane potential within the cell. So to talk about the homeostasis. So homeostasis, that's the ability of any system to maintain a relatively stable internal state that persists despite of any change from the extracellular or intracellular players. The ion homeostasis, that's the movement of ions across the membrane in both directions in order to maintain a steady state, stable state. So if you just concentrate on this figure, for example, we have different kinds of ions, and these ions enter into the cell through their specialized ion channels. And these ion channels, once they open or close, they maintain a specific ion concentration within different organelles of the cell, like the endoplasmic reticulum in the mitochondria, in the lysosome, and also peroxisomes, Golgi bodies, all of these organelles, they contain some kind of ions like the magnesium, the calcium, the chloride, the sodium. The homeostasis, I would say the ion homeostasis is more like a game of a chess. So in a chess, if you have any move, all the players are affected. Their moves for the future are affected. So if any of the ions is increased or decreased within the cell, or any of the ion channel is opened or closed, it affects almost every other channel within the membrane and within the organelles. Just to talk briefly about the different types of ion channels, we have the ligand-gated ion channels, which need some ligand or signaling molecule. And once this signaling molecule is bound to the channel is either open or closed, depending on if it is closed before and the ion, the signaling molecule binds, it opens. And if the channel is open, sometimes the signaling molecules or the molecules that bind to those channels, they block the entry of that particular ion. Then we have the mechanically gated channels, which are more sensitive to like pressure, like touch. Then there are certain channels which stay open all the time, and they just readjust the ion homeostasis across the membrane due to the concentration gradients. And then we have the voltage gated ion channels, which are sensitive to the ion concentration across the membrane. So they are sensitive to the voltage difference across the membrane. So they are either open or closed based on which way they need to adjust the ions across the membranes. To talk about the most important ions and how they actually regulate the plasma membrane and its polarity and action potential, we have the calcium. Calcium is a divalent cation, and if enters into the cell, it leads to depolarization. And generally, its concentration within the cytosol is around 1 micromolar. So then we have the sodium, which is a monovalent cation. Its concentration within the cytosol is around 10 millimolar. And it also, if sodium moves into the cell, it leads to depolarization. Then we have the non-selective ion channels, which can like move all the positive ions or all the negative ions. We have chloride ion channels. If the chloride ion moves into the cell, it leads to repolarization. And if it enters more, it even leads to hyperpolarization. And if it leaves the cytosol, it leads to depolarization. And similarly, potassium ion, if potassium ion goes out of the cell, it leads to repolarization or hyperpolarization. And all of these phenomena, they are linked to cytoskeleton, to oxidation reduction, to increase in phosphorylation, ATP, and different mechanisms of the cell. I will just talk about the ion distribution, and as I cannot focus on all of the ions, I will take calcium as an example. Similarly, different ions, they have different distribution within the cytosol. So when we say calcium, calcium is not uniform within the whole cell. So we have endoplasmic reticulum, which is generally the major store of the calcium ions. And within the endoplasmic reticulum, we have the calcium concentration around 500 micromolar as compared to the cytosol under the resting condition, where the calcium concentration is around 1 micromolar or below micromolar. So when the calcium store is open due to the ryanodine receptors or the IP3 receptor, the calcium moves into the cytosol, and that calcium is buffered by the mitochondria, which then reaches to the same level of calcium concentration as it was there in the endoplasmic reticulum. And this buffering effect actually makes the movement of calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum into the mitochondria very efficiently. And once we have depletion of the calcium in the endoplasmic reticulum, the channels in the plasma membrane open, and these channels let the calcium move into the cytosol, and from cytosol then it moves into the endoplasmic reticulum again. So that's one example that how actually cell maintains ions at different organelles, and how the inter relationship of these organelles maintain the whole cellular ion homeostasis. So to talk about the role of ion homeostasis in physiology and then in disease, I just enlisted some of them because we cannot actually enlist all of them. So the action potential and generation of impulse, all of you know that ions are important for that. The resting membrane potential, the cardiac rhythms, the biological sensing for contractility of the muscles to maintain the volume of the cell, for secretions of the hormones, secretion of the neurotransmitters, the proliferation of the cell to maintain the cell cycle, and even in cancer progression and cell migration and signaling and all these things. If we talk about the disease, some of the major diseases which are like the major ones are affected are the cancer. We have a role of iron homeostasis in infertility, in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, diabetes, muscular disorder, neuromuscular disorders, and there are many more. To emphasize on just one organelle, we say the mitochondria and how iron homeostasis is maintained over there. We have different players like the mitochondrial calcium uniporter, which is important for the movement of the calcium ions into the mitochondria. And then we have certain transporters like the NCX, the sodium calcium exchanger or the sodium proton exchanger, which are responsible for the movement of the calcium outside of the mitochondria. And in this way, the mitochondria maintains the calcium at a certain level. And how actually this mitochondrial calcium uniporter is linked to disease. So I will just present two of the diseases which we are working on in our lab. For example, we recently found that an increase in the expression level of one of the player, which is the MCU2, mitochondrial calcium uniporter 2, if expression of that gene increases, which actually moves the calcium into the mitochondria, we have a significant difference between the controls and the patient. So this is the data from the breast cancer patients. Similarly, in infertility, we found it out that a downregulation of MCU leads to the infertility. So that's how important these ions and those channels and proteins which are important for their movement across the membrane, they are important. Just a brief 10-second introduction to the techniques that we use to actually study the ion homeostasis. We study the ion homeostasis extensively through fluorescent microscopy and through the patch clamp experiments. So these are just two of them, then there are many more. And then just that how actively people are actually working on the ion homeostasis related research. So this is an overview of the different papers published. If you just search the ion homeostasis in PubMed, you see that there is an increase of the research which is coming out throughout the year. If we start with 1946 and 2019, so every year we have more and more research which is coming out related to the ion homeostasis. So with this, I will just wind it up. Thank you for your listening, and if you have any questions for me.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Jadoon. I would like to ask a question, which is, I think you are sitting in the Department of Biosciences at Comsat University, and there is no affiliated hospital over there. So how difficult is for you to research in this setting, because you are trained somewhere in the international setting where these all you have shown in the slide that all the instruments were there, but how difficult is to conduct such research projects and to train your physicians and your bioscientists in Pakistan in this context? How we can improve and when we can improve? How much time is required to improve?
Yeah. Okay. So one of the major problem which we face being from the basic science and not working in the hospitals is at the end of the part of the problem. So the clinicians, they actually face a problem. So if there is a new phenotype and some new disease or some trend in a particular disease, we are not aware of that. Unless and until we have an access to those clinicians. So I think in Pakistan especially, we should increase these collaborations between the hospitals and between the medical universities and other universities, because we are good at the basic biology thing. We are good at the molecular biology, we can do that. But the problem is that most of the time we are not even aware of the problem. For example, right now we are in the COVID era, right? So there would be some new trends in some particular diseases which are appearing just because we have coronavirus around us. but we are not aware of it. We can solve it on the molecular levels. We can solve it on the cell signaling level, but only once we have an access to all this data or problems. So we definitely need some platforms where we can share our knowledges and where we can share our problems, specifically the problems, the scientific problems which are faced by the clinicians, and where they need some help from the basic biologist or the molecular biologist or molecular geneticist.
Dr. General Islam, if you want to add something regarding his point of view, you said that the genetic centers are not available. Genetic centers are there in the different university like Punjab University, Karachi University. How we can integrate this system? How we can
Yeah.
improve this research process?
Yeah, in USA, this problem has been solved because all the basic sciences department, they are in the universities from the beginning. So that is why 16 years of education is the point of entry into MBBS. So they do all this research in those universities, and then the hospitals and the medical schools are only concerned with the medical studies. But that is difficult. We copied the British system, which is getting diluted. It has been diluted to some extent in UK, but we have to find some biomedia in which the clinicians, the researchers, and the basic scientists, they work in the same laboratory to solve these problems.
Would you like to continue with such webinars, sir, so we can brainstorm about certain topics? We can be on the same forum. Would you suggest certain efforts like this? I think
Sure, by all means. Yes.
to start. There is
By all
one
means.
question that by Professor, Brigadier Professor Dr. Rizwan Hashim, and he is asking about the collaboration with NIH can be helpful for your joint success, and genetic sequencing is he thought is available at AFIP and even in the private sector and for this research purpose. But sir, I think anyone who want to answer this from the speakers.
I think the best thing should be that the leadership of Shifa or leadership of any of the institutes, they can talk the leadership of FAP and NIH, and from there, from the top, if they agree, and then the correspondences can go on, and this matter can be resolved. It could be done in some way.
Okay, thank you very much.
Because, I was listening to one of the, it was in the TV in the morning that they are going into the second or third phase of vaccine trials in NIH. NIH is taking a lead. So things like that. I mean, the top leadership of the institutes can talk to each other and can visit each other to keep the things going. And rest of the things can be taken up by you and any scientists or clinicians.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Dr. Farooq is with us. Dr. Farooq, would you like to enlighten us your perspective? You are sitting at the clinical setting of the Shifa International Hospital. You are a radiation oncologist and very much interested in the biobank and other projects. What is the significance of all this research and how we can improve this? Please enlighten.
Dr. Sumara, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure. And just responding or expanding what Dr. Jadoon has just mentioned, if you are working abroad, there are usually MS, MPhil, PhD students who are coming from the bench, to the bedside. So the worst thing which I feel here, we do not have interaction with the basic sciences from around the city, this twin city. So just answering or expanding the question, we have these young cancer patients of rectum who are at the age of 14, 17, 21, 24, 27, and they keep on popping up as newly established cancers. And as we know, cancer is a disease of elderly, not younger people. So the first thing that strikes to us is why a younger person has a cancer which should occur at 44. So when you explore their family history, you do not find any vertical or horizontal.
I think there is some break in
There is
lag
I
in the audio. Yes.
audio. Should we move to the next panelist, or should we wait? There is one suggestion by Brigadier Rizwan regarding those who are interested in research. They can move to for the collaboration with the Park Health Research Council. According to him, this is the platform where they can integrate and they can seek for the research grants and other ventures. And there is one query regarding frustrated point of view that it's very difficult to assess the data for research from someone if he is a clinician, even at Shifa International Hospital. If you are not the part of the system, this is very difficult to retrieve data from the databases of the different clinical settings. So I think that must be answered by Dr. Farooq, but I see Dr. Farooq is with us again.
Yes,
Okay,
Dr. Farooq is here, but Dr. Farooq, would you like to answer this question?
He's muted, still
There is
muted.
something issue.
Technical.
Actually, from my side, from here, he's unmute. He seems to be unmuted. उनका कोई audio technical issue है. So we can proceed, I think.
Okay, I think the next panelist is Dr. Ashraf with us. He is actually expert in the.
Dr. Samira, 1 second. Dr. Farooq wants to say something. Dr. Farooq, actually, there is some problem with your audio. We cannot hear you. No, we still cannot hear you.
I think we should move to the Dr. Ashraf, then we will ask the Dr. Farooq again. Dr. Ashraf, if you can add, he's basically the very active member who is teaching us about the biomedical ethics. So the next topic, we switch from the cell in the other, how we can improve the biomedical ethics, and Dr. Ashraf hopefully is with us.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sabrina.
Yes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. As we have seen in all the previous presentations, all these highlighted the importance of understanding the basic mechanisms for better understanding of the disease process. Really, we need that because in order to produce good medical doctors, we need that they should have a very good concept and understanding of the disease process, and hence the importance of the basic sciences. But I'll take you to another dimension. Not only that these future doctors should only understand the importance of the disease process, but they should also understand the impact of the disease on the society. They should also understand the impact of the treatment on the society, and they should also understand the impact of the research that is going on for finding the treatment or finding the reason for the disease. So that also impact our society. So in order to have a competent doctors in the society, we have to incorporate these things in our curriculum. Take the example of the disease. Recently, we have suffered from COVID-19, and you all know that this disease created a huge impact on our psychosocial status of the society, plus the economical status as well. But we are more concerned with the psychosocial status. Similarly, when we come to the treatment of the disease process, treatment of the disease, one can argue that why the treatment of the disease produces impact on the society. No, because as we know that the treatment for the end-stage renal failure is transplantation. But for the transplantation, we went for the transplantation, the huge organ trade took place in the society. So similarly, for infertility, when you go for the infertility came as a disease and the treatment came, then you had a lot of issues with the ethical problems with the techniques which were used for that. Surrogacy came into the picture. And then the biobanks, of course, they have significant importance. Then the semen banks, then the ovum banks, and of course the designer babies also came into the market. So the students should not only know the mechanism or the process of this, but they should also know the impact of these treatments on the society as well, so that they can better prevent the wrongful impacts of these treatments on the society. Similarly, we take the research. Research, of course, it's very necessary for diagnosing the disease and finding out the causative agents for the disease and future treatments for the disease. But the problem with the stem cells research plus the cloning research, the people went for human cloning, and then it created a tremor in the whole world. And then the international media plus the developed countries, they had to stop the research till the 14 days of the embryo. So they could not proceed beyond that. So these topics should have to be included while we prepare the medical students for future practice in the society. In Shifa, since 2008, we have incorporated all these topics into different modules because we have a modular curriculum, integrated modular curriculum here. So all these topics have been incorporated in their respective modules, so that when students, they are primed in that. When they come to these modules, they are primed, and when they move to the clinical side, they can practice that. So the basic aim is to produce the competent doctors, not in their specialty, not in their field, but they should take care of the society as well. And in every module means from the beginning of life issues to end of the life issues, and in the cell you have the stem cell cloning, and when it comes to the nutrition, genetically modified food and its implication in the society. So all this has to be taught in the basic science curriculum. But one thing I should mention here, that it's not only the teaching and the sermons that work. It is basically the role modeling. When they move to the clinical side, they should have the role models for which whom they could follow. So we need to work on that as well, so that when our students, they move to the clinical side, they have proper role models in front of their eyes, so they could follow that. And I think that will improve our curriculum as well. Thank you very much. So any questions, I'm ready to take.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we should ask Dr. Farooq again if he is available and he want to speak something. Can you hear us, sir? Because in the second phase, we have to take questions, perspective of students, graduate students from Shifa, as well as from the various other institutions who are working in the local as well as in the international settings. So before we move to the next phase, I would like to ask Dr. Farooq if he can, he's interested to say something.
Dr. Pervez Iqbal is also here, and he's written a very pertinent suggestion
Yeah,
if you
yes,
could ask.
I can read for you. Okay, there is one very good suggestion by Dr. Parvez Iqbal. Okay, if there is another model for making our medical graduates or students interested in basic sciences research is to encourage them to take a 1-year fellowship in research or join MPhil or MPH program after graduation. This way, they can become clinician scientists and would have an edge over their peers in terms of getting better position in academics. And I think if anyone from the panelists or speakers want to comment about this suggestion, I think this is a very good suggestion.
Or
Dr.
if Dr. Parvez Iqbal himself wants to unmute himself, we have 1 or 2 minutes. He can further elaborate on that point. Sir, if you would like to do that, maybe.
Okay, you can add if you can add. We have time.
I think I can say something. Australian, they have a similar model as well. They have a separate track for the those who want to go for research as well. So I think we can have that as well.
Okay.
So just a comment to add up to the comment by Dr. Ashraf. As I have done my PhD from a medical university, so I was doing my PhD in basic science, but from a medical university, and I didn't have a background in the medicine prior to that. So we need certain PhD programs or master programs which can accommodate students from the basic sciences as well as from the medicine as well. So in that program, those of us who were from the basic sciences, we were taught the basics of the medicine, the courses like anatomy, parasitology, pharmacology, and all these. And those students which were coming from the medical background, those were taught the courses from the basic molecular biology and basic biology. And then the university, they had two different major areas, which they were called like the preclinical research and the clinical research. So there were people who were working on the diseases directly, and then there were people who were doing the molecular biology or the signaling mechanisms of those diseases. So we need certain programs which are somehow collaboration between the medical universities and the other mainstream universities which are producing the basic biology graduates.
Thank you very much. I think we should move. We have a limited time, and we have to switch towards the next phase of questions with the question answer session with the students, graduate students. The first student is Dr. Saqib. He is with us, hopefully. Dr. Saqib.
Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. Thank you, and I've heard the distinguished members over here. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you. The camera is switched.
Right here. I think you should be able to see me now.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please introduce yourself with a brief introduction. You can comment about the topics which we have discussed so far.
So I'm currently practicing medicine over here at University of Illinois in the U.S. and postgraduate year 5. And, I fell in love with biochemistry and physiology after graduation, and unfortunately. The reason for that is when we're going through basic sciences in our part of the world, we don't know the importance of things. But once you enter clinical life, especially in the US, you notice these things on a daily basis almost. I'd like to give at least 2 examples over here. So, for example, a patient with hepatic encephalopathy comes to the hospital, and this patient is started on lactulose or zinc. And you can start this patient on this medication, but if you know what is the basis of this, it all goes back to biochemistry. Conversion of ammonia to ammonium by lactulose. And zinc helps in it's a cofactor that's needed in the urea cycle. This is all that we studied in biochemistry, but unfortunately we forgot those things. And the second point is whenever you're starting someone on medicine, for example, for patients with ulcerative colitis, we start them on azathioprine. Now, when we start them, we have to check the genetic levels of 6-mercaptopurines and the metabolites after starting treatment. And as long as you don't know the basic biochemistry behind the cell cycle, you will not enjoy or you will not know what is going on. So I think knowing the basics of biochemistry and physiology not only helps you to become a good clinician, but it actually helps you to fall in love with medicine. Thirdly, I would like to address the importance of genetics. And that is one of the most rapidly expanding field. And research over here in the US, they're trying to connect genetics to almost everything now. Most recently in October, there was a publication in the Journal of Gastroenterology, and that mentioned the diseases like microscopic colitis, collagenous colitis, celiac diseases, and IBD linked to the same HLA locus. The interest in the US is a lot more, and I would say even if people are not interested, they're forced to do research. The reason being that if you want to get into competitive fellowships, if you want to get into competitive residencies, you have to have research. That is why some people spend an extra year, and even people do unpaid fellowships, unpaid research, just to get into competitive fellowships. So that is something that we lack in our country. And I think in the panelists over here and guests, we have a lot of opportunity over there, and hopefully we can move forward in that direction. That's all I had to add.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Saqib. I would like to ask one question. There was a confusion, and there were many queries from our student side. That there is in Pakistan we have a weightage of anatomies more than the biochemistry and physiology and the pathology as well. So what is the weightage over there on your side in USMLE PLEB? What is your suggestion? What should be the weightage of these subjects? How we should distribute this weightage? How we can improve our medical curriculum?
That is a very, very important question. And, I think our medical system is great. Coming from that medical system, I was, I felt blessed because my knowledge was more than an average American student over here. And I was one of the best graduates of the university over here in postgraduate training. The only thing that I felt was not that important was anatomy. To be really honest, we spent 70% of the time in first year and second year of medical school studying anatomy, studying where the veins are going, where the arteries are going, where they're turning left and right. But once you come to clinical world, the most important thing is physiology and biochemistry. Cell cycle, like simple basic reactions, everyday management, every disease process is interlinked to biochemistry and physiology. So I think we should start paying more time. They should have equal weightage, especially biochemistry. I feel it's highly neglected in our part of the clinical training over there, and that is something that we should look into.
Thank you very much for your experience. And now we will move toward the Dr. Yusuf. He is with us. He's a Shifa graduate, and he already did his USMLE and PLEB. Dr. Yusuf, if you are with us, please. We can't.
Can you hear me, Dr. Sameera?
Yeah. Please continue with the discussion which we have discussed so far with Dr. Saqib from that University of Illinois. What is your suggestion and how you can see this?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Saqib. That was very enlightening. And I recently read a paper that you published on hepatic enzymes and their association with COVID-19 as well. So always on the lookout for good gastro research from your end. So I would want to talk a little bit about some positives that I noticed as a graduate in Pakistan. With regards to the USMLE clinical exams, PLAB clinical exams, and how our transition towards integrated clinical skills at an early age in medical school helped me. From first year, whether we were doing an endocrinology module, learning about counseling diabetes patients, these sort of things in first year introduced us into not just the techniques of taking good histories and how to counsel patients, but it helped us become more involved in learning those disease processes. And those proved very beneficial in fourth year, final year, when we would transition into our medical specialties. So internal medicine, general surgery, things like that, because now we were seeing patients, but we had a few years of practice in learning how to talk to patients and why we're asking the questions that we are asking. A part of that, I would like to mention what Dr. Usher was talking about. I remember he used to teach us medical ethics as well, and it's something that I feel does need to be focused on more in the Pakistani clinical setup, and those definitely served very valuable when I was preparing for and giving exams in the US and the UK. It adds to your confidence as a physician. You do feel that talking to patients over there, you do have a background on what might be expected from physicians over there as well. Similarly, one thing that I feel like could be a good thing for us to maybe think about, a food for thought, would be just building up on what Dr. Saqib talked about, was something that I also noticed specifically in an exam setting as well, was that maybe while I feel like we are transitioning towards better integration of clinical curriculums into our basic sciences, we do need to maybe have a look at how our content division is focused and maybe try to modify that and adjust that in a way that can help future graduates become better clinicians, better scientists, and better doctors in the future. Thank you.
Okay, any comment from the other speakers or panelists if you want to add? I think Dr. Afroz is also with us right now. Dr. Afroz, if you can hear us. We can see she is available.
Dr. Samrina, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, please. If you can comment about any suggestion, or if you were with us, you can add something.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. A very healthy discussion going on. I would just like to add a few things. One is that we need to focus on an area that is, I think, what we've been discussing for the last 1 hour. There are two areas. One is that how we should integrate the basic research in the clinical sciences. And the second is how we should inculcate the basic research in the medical students, because medical students are lacking their ability to understand the importance of basic research. So what I think is what needs to be done, I think Dr. Nahid Gul had very pertinently given a suggestion that we need to first revisit that how we are integrating the clinical sciences in the medical fields, in the medical subjects, especially physiology and biochemistry. Secondly, when the students are in third year, fourth year, or final year, we need to see that how we can integrate the basic subjects according to the clinical clinicians, that what the students are lacking. Maybe we can enforce those topics or those concepts to the medical students in final year, so that they can understand the importance of the basics of those topics. Secondly, talking about research, there are very good discussion in the chat box, and what I think is that we need to go and attend the MDTs in Shifa International Hospital to understand that what are the research questions and what are the areas where we can actually do fruitful research, and the questions are posted over there by the clinicians, and we can help them as well as ourselves to improve the clinical outcome of those patients. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Afroz. I think Dr. Brigadier Rizwan is with us. We will allow, if you want to comment, Dr. Brigadier Rizwan, can you hear us? I think you are added as a co-host. You can comment.
Dr. Sarina, let me just unmute him.
Okay, please unmute. Brigadier Rizwan, if you can hear us, please, we can see your comments in the chat box. They're very valuable comments, and we would like to see you.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, a very nice discussion.
And this may be a surprise for you, and I'm continuously receiving your messages on this side. Please enlighten us about the topic, what we are doing, and what are these, how we can improve.
Yes, please. General Aslam, my teacher and my mentor is sitting over here, and I would simply like to request that it's very important that the integration of the basic sciences with the pharma industry, with the computer science department, and with the these clinicians, it is essentially required at this point in time. The research has gone into the genetic or at the genetic level. It may be physiology, it may be anatomy or histology, the various mutations at the receptor. And we have seen in the coronavirus that the spike protein, the S protein antigen was the main culprit for causing all sorts of devastation in the multi-organ disease. So the various types of the mutation that have been carried out in this virus to make it or travel it from the this human to human transmission. So these are the areas of researches which require collection of data at the molecular level. And these data, they cannot be analyzed by simple softwares. And the education system requires to have an understanding at this level of a 2020 graduate that there are certain softwares which are beyond the health sciences, but they can be partially understood by the basic sciences mentors and professors in order to carry out the various sorts of research. So all the basic sciences research has gone at the molecular level. This understanding is required, and it cannot be analyzed by a simple collection of empirical sort of data. And it requires the intervention of very sophisticated softwares in order to analyze these output. Thank you very much.
You'd like to suggest that our team must include the bioinformatics, people from the computer sciences, bioinformatics, and various other fields also, along with the biosciences, clinicians, and various other specialties. So we
yes,
can
we need somehow. We need to have a very close relationship with the various departments of the ComSat University, and they have got the Institute of Biological Sciences by Professor Habib Bukhari and other very learned people from University of
many learned people around us. So we have to just collaborate and contact them, knock the door, and maybe we can collaborate and sit together and discuss. Okay,
yes,
thank you very much. Thank you very much for your valuable comments. And now we would like to move towards the Professor Dr. Rifat Shafi. She is the chairperson of Basic Health Sciences at Shifa College of Medicine. And we would like to ask her, please conclude and give your concluding remarks along with what is actually how we are teaching medical curriculum at Shifa College of Medicine, and how what are the lessons for us and for others as well, which we have learned during the 1.5 hour discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samreena. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everybody. I think basic sciences are essential in undergraduate as well as postgraduate medical education, as they provide a framework on which the clinical concepts are built. So SEM follows integrated curriculum, as Dr. Ashraf has already mentioned, and the basic sciences are taught with clinical relevance. The first 3 years they are taught basic sciences with linking these basic sciences with the clinical application. And I believe that in the clinical years too, the basic sciences, they play a vital role in understanding the underlying disease process. So it is very important. The way we teach is, for example, like cell membrane, a 2-year-old boy, a case scenario for a 2-year-old boy with chronic productive cough who is diagnosed to have cystic fibrosis. Now, this cystic fibrosis is because of the abnormal chloride channels. So these abnormal or mutated chloride channels are used as a trigger to start a discussion for the normal structure and function of cell membrane, to teach the structure of proteins, and to teach the properties of amino acids. Similarly, a 14-year-old child with generalized edema and proteinuria. Now, this case is again used as a trigger as to why protein is present in this case in his urine, and how is normally protein prevented from appearing in the urine. And from there onwards, we can go to the discussion on how the urine is formed, how filtration takes place, how reabsorption and secretion takes place. And then another question, why did edema develop because of this proteinuria? And then again, other causes of edema are discussed, and then the normal dynamics of body fluids can be discussed over here. Now, other modules also, all the modules that we have, they have clinical case scenarios, and the learning objectives, they are discussed under these case scenarios in order to link it with the clinical scenarios, clinical applications. I think teaching basic sciences with relevance should be promoted for future. And as the students are here to become doctors, so they need to know whatever they are being taught, what is the relevance of that, those topics that are being taught. So clinical relevance over here is very important, because when they are taught with clinical relevance, they learn more, they understand more, and they retain the knowledge more. So this is very important. This will develop their interest in the subject, and this will lay a strong foundation for the clinical reasoning in the coming years. So thank you. This was
there is one comment by Dr. Saqib from University of Illinois. They have redesigned their curriculum, I think, in the last year. And if Dr. Saqib, you can unmute and tell us about that change and what was the result about.
Yes, ma'am. So basically this year, actually last year, University of Illinois decided that medical students who start medical school, they will start clinical rotations and hospital rotations right from day one. And before, they used to do it in year 3, just like in Pakistan and some of the other countries. So I've worked with some of those medical students, and my attendings also worked with them. And it's been very unsatisfactory so far. And the reason being that those medical students who are coming, they have no idea what the basics are. And if especially in Pakistan, you have busy clinical practice, you don't have time to sit down and tell them that, hey, this reaction happens like this, or this disease has this physiology, this biochemistry going underneath it. So I feel like if we're going to redesign our structure, we have to be very cautious, because just following someone else blindly that their system works doesn't mean that it totally works. So we got to learn from others, as well as sometimes appreciate our system as well, that we do have some pluses.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment, Doctor. If anyone is interested, otherwise we will move toward the last part of this session, and I would request Dr. General Aslam, please, if you can comment and then conclude the session.
Dr. Samrina, Dr. Parvez Iqbal was commented some about a few important points. So if he could unmute himself and just elaborate on those points, if he's hearing us. Otherwise,
okay, if he's with us, he can comment. If you can hear us, Dr. Parvez Iqbal, for the comments, we are waiting.
Dr.
Parvez Iqbal, if you can hear us.
I can hear you. I can hear all of you.
Okay, please. We are waiting for your comment.
Ji, please repeat the question. I missed it.
Actually, we there are a lot of comments from your side in the chat box. Can you please conclude about the comments which you have given in the chat box or any suggestion?
Yeah, wonderful. I enjoyed every bit of today's webinar. These are simply wonderful presentations. My question to these galaxy of excellent basic scientists and clinicians is that would some of these concepts find its way into the exit exam, which is planned by the Pakistan Medical Commission? If the basic scientists that we have today, if they are not including in setting up the questions in that exam, I'm afraid that these concepts, these basic essential concepts would not find their way in the exit exam. So this is my question to panelists. If anyone would like to assure me, but people like Professor Aslam, who has been the stalwarts in this field, if people like him are not included in the exit exam, I'm afraid that these concepts will miss their way.
I think we will request Dr. Professor Jalal Aslam if you can say something.
Now coming back to the topic, that is the era in which we studied was of content overload. Now gradually the medical schools, they realize, and the medical educationists, they realize there should be more emphasis on contextual learning rather than going to content overload. So that has framed the unnecessary aspects of the curriculum, which is good. And then the concept of horizontal and vertical integration and the concept of internship and then the clerkship during the early years, as is practiced in some of the colleges in Pakistan too, that is from 4th year or from 3.5 years, starting the clerkship. So this contextual learning, and then there is a need for which this workshop, webinar was organized, that how can we hybridize research, right, into the medical curriculum, and the research from bedside to bed and from bed to the community should travel. Because there are 3 parameters of Blue's taxonomy, that is analysis, evaluative judgment, and synthesis. So these 3 parameters, analysis, evaluative judgment, and synthesis, they can neither be learned in the classroom, they can neither be learned with the seminars, they can neither be learned with the bedside training, that is a clinical training. So these can only be learned with the research. So now it is time to sit for every institution whether this research should be in the preclinical or pure research, or it should be applied research or clinical research for the patients. I would think the research requires a lot of loads of money. We would leave it to the financial status of each institution to sit together, whether they want to go for biological research or biomedical research or the clinical research. They can decide on their own, but these internship, clerkship, rotation, and now there is a time to hybridize the mini research projects into the medical curriculum. Of course, I endorse, though this is not the forum, but I endorse the comments of Professor Dr. Parvez Iqbal, that is, the seasoned teachers must be included in the exit examination if it is decided. It's in a fluid form. Let's see whether it comes or not. But it can't be 2 different opinions that the teachers and clinicians who are seasoned must be included in that board to avoid innocent killing of the graduates. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I think we are left with 1 or 2 minutes. Before we conclude and we ask for the dua, Dr. Farooq is again asking us to, can we unmute him?
Dr. Sabina, he's unmute from my side. Actually, I can't even see Dr. Farooq. Dr. Farooq is, let me just try.
Amir is with us, sir. Sir, if you want to add or say something about the topic or importance of this topic within a minute, so while we are waiting for this.
Dr. Farooq is not here in the meeting. I cannot see him.
I think he can add something.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think it has been a very useful webinar, and I'm sure all the participants must have gained a lot of insight into the understanding what we were aiming at how basic sciences can add to the lifelong learning of a clinician as well. And as we added the term going back to the basics, so as I was saying on that day, that the basics will always remain part of our, the whole life, because that is based on the basic building blocks. It's like an ABC or Alif Bata or Alif Bete. That's where the life goes on, and we become clinicians, we become experts in our field. But the basic teaching, if it has been elementary teaching in the preclinical or pre-medical era, or it's the basic science teaching which we get in our medical curriculum or other curricula as well. So they remain the foundation stones on which the whole building of our career is built. So that's why we keep on saying, as we have been saying in our own curriculum as well, that we have to reflect and we have to see when we are trying to understand a disease process, that where lies the roots of this disease, where is the ABC of this disease, so that if we understand the root cause and whether it's genetic or it's acquired, it's in the environment or somewhere, then we understand the disease process better, and whether we can deal with that effectively or not, that becomes the next question. So this pandemic of COVID has also taught us the same lessons of the basics of understanding of any disease process. And the epidemiological process, when that was put in place, so that became the basic of all types of management which was done globally as well. So understanding of a problem, as you were saying, underpinning of a disease process is what has to be the basic thing, the most significant thing in the learning of any disease process. So that's my take on this subject, and I always keep on saying it. The whole life of our clinicians or our other scientists, that we have to refer back to the basics. So, thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Samina ji, I've made Dr. Farooq, actually he joined using name iPhone. So he's there. If he wants to comment, he can say a few words. I've allowed him to unmute himself.
Oh, yes, he's there.
Dr. Farooq, you can now unmute yourself, and if you want to say something. Maybe he's having some connectivity issues. No, now he's unmuted himself. Ji, Dr. Farooq, please. Dr. Sabina, I think he's facing some connectivity issues.
We can conclude.
So I would like to request Professor General Iqbal to General Aslam to please for the dua. So we already conclude the session, and I would request you to please.
Thank you very much. This reminds me, great Dean Dr. Muhammad Amin, father of Shifa College of Medicine. He always used to recite these verses at the end of any web. In those days, webinar was not in practice in any of the meetings or seminars. Walas, innal insana lafi khusr, illa allazina amanu wa amilu salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqqi, wa tawasaw bis sabr. Sadaqallahu azim.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, audience, from your side. Okay, thank you.